Good evening, everyone. My name is Ted Kesik, and I'm a professor here in the faculty. And I happen to have the privilege of coordinating the B.E.S.T lecture series, and this is the third lecture in the 2013-14 Building Ecology, Science and Technology lecture series. And it's generously sponsored by Tremco Roofing. A little note here for those of you who wish to obtain a certificate recognizing your attendance at this for OAA continuing education credits. All you have to do is fill out one of the forms, and then we will eventually, and I always promise everyone, we will eventually get your certificates out to you. So you'll be able to have those emailed if you do one thing that's very important, and that is print clearly. So we did pretty good. In the last, we processed about 300 certificates, and we only had 10 certificates that we had to take down to the pharmacy. And then the pharmacist said, oh yes, well that's whatever, that's hotmail.ca. I said, well, I would never have guessed that was hotmail.ca. But so we're getting better at that, and we do have a pharmacy school here, and they have a maestro that can almost decipher anything. But we'd rather not go there because it's cold and a little ways away. So at this time, I'd like to invite Paul Sheehy, who's the Vice President of Tremco Roofing and Maintenance, to say a few words. Paul?
Thank you, Ted. On behalf of Tremco Roofing, I would like to say what an honor it is to be associated with the University of Toronto and with the B.E.S.T lecture series from its inception, which I think now this is in our fourth year. Fifth? There you go. Time flies when you're having fun. So in its fifth year, it's indeed an honor for our organization. And I know you're not here to hear about me, but I'm just going to give you a short little commercial. We manufacture in Leaside. We've been in Leaside since 1938. I probably got the year wrong now. I usually know that at the top of my head, but it's a new year, so I'm getting older, right? So thank you on behalf of Tremco, and I'm hoping that the wine and cheese after, you can come up and say hello, and we can have a quick chat. And belated as it is, Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you, Ted.
Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight's lecture, Professor Jennifer Drake from the Department of Civil Engineering here at the University of Toronto. Jennifer's research interests are directed towards low-impact development and stormwater systems, watershed planning, stormwater, water security, and wet weather policy. There's just a whole bunch of things that Jennifer is good at. I gather, just briefly, I don't know her that well personally, but she has a healthy skepticism towards what people say about these technologies, and of course has been very interested in trying to figure out exactly how they really work, and that's really the point of tonight's lecture, is to explore that. She's also an active hydrology researcher here at the Green Roof Innovation Testing Laboratory, a green roof testing lab that we have on the roof here at the Daniels faculty. So this evening she will be enlightening us about low-impact development techniques that work, and I'd like to have all of you please join me in welcoming Jennifer Drake. Jennifer?
All right, good evening and thank you everybody. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to talk about some of my work with LID in the Toronto area, and also just go over stormwater management. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a background, because I know we have a pretty diverse crowd here, and just kind of go through the reality of stormwater management today in Southern Ontario, and then examine what the actual principles of low impact development is. Often we focus on the technologies, but it's actually something bigger than that, something broader. It's an entire philosophy with principles. And then I'll go through a few key studies that are Ontario specific, that have really been proving the performance of some of these technologies in our climate. And lastly, some of the resources that are available today to help design and construct these systems. So today's reality. Well, I think everyone is particularly with the events over the holidays, as well as last summer, we are aware that our infrastructure is really under stress. And our stormwater systems have stress from a number of major factors. The first is the population growth, that we have 50,000 people come to Toronto every year, and that's expected to continue for the foreseeable future. And that builds water demand. On top of that, we have an infrastructure deficit, and I'll give you some numbers about that in the next slides. But then we also have changing climate, which in Ontario means an increase in the frequency of what we consider extreme events. And lastly, every day our populations are demanding more of their water services. They have increased expectations. We want our water resources to not only give us clean drinking water, but we also expect to have recreational areas, and we expect to use water for a variety of purposes, sometimes with conflicting requirements. So there's been an evolution of urban water management, and we see this throughout the globe. As cities have evolved, we start with just water supply, providing the necessity of life. But from that, we've grown, and we have subsequent infrastructure systems, the sanitary systems, then a storm system, and then moving beyond that to whole waterways and water cycle focuses. So we recognize that if we want to have drinking water, we have to look at the big picture. It's not just, you can't just take one piece of the puzzle. So some notable things that are specific to Ontario, most importantly would have been the Hurricane Hazel event. This has really defined flooding conditions and what's possible in terms of flooding as we've experienced it to date. And it led to the legislation that created the conservation authorities that we have today. And also, very significantly, it implemented decades ago, floodplain management, which prevents the development in areas adjacent to rivers where you're in areas of high extreme risk of flooding. So you don't have people there when the waters come, we don't have to rescue them, and we're not going to be worried about deaths or loss of property. Moving forward, there's a real transition around 1980 where we start to see subdivision development at post-1980 starts to have consideration for quantity control of storm water. A lot of neighborhoods, pre-1980 are built without a huge consideration as to where's the water going, what's the grading, what is going to be the capacity. And so we have a legacy of neighborhoods that don't necessarily have infrastructure that has been designed for stormwater management. Approximately, and this is just approximately, post-1980, we start to have urban development that includes areas put aside to hold water when it comes. And the default system that we've been using since 1980s is a pond, which allows some storage and also quality benefits. And the thinking at the time was that the problems that we experience during flooding is an issue of rate. It's the peak flow that happens. And so if we can just hold that water back for an amount of time, we won't have the flooding downstream. Now, this, as we've seen moving forward, isn't fixing the entire problem, because if you think of things like erosion, what's actually taking place is a problem of energy. And so even if you shave down the peak, if you still release that water later, it still contains energy, which ultimately is going to lead to erosion. We're still going to have some problems. So we've started then, after just having a pond for storage, we've started broadening the objectives, and there's been an emphasis then on providing quality treatment and also management of erosion flows. And what we start to notice is around the 90s, late 90s, new technologies and a new way of thinking starts cropping up, first in the US and then kind of moving north of the border. And this is the beginnings beginnings of low-impact development. The other thing that has been significant, which connects to the way we manage water in Ontario for us, was the Walkerton crisis, because this really hit home that for us to have safe drinking water, we need to understand the big picture. You need to know where the source of your water, and you need to manage the source of your water responsibly so that when you use it at the end source, it's going to be in a condition that's good to go, that's safe. So, urbanization represents a drastic change in the landscape of a watershed or catchment areas. As our cities grow and develop, we cover them with hardscape surfaces that are impermeable and allow rainfall to run off them very rapidly. We then follow suit by designing, as engineers, very efficient hydro systems that take the water rapidly out and to the next place downstream. So this results in a change in the water balance, a very significant change of the water balance. And ultimately, we end up being dependent on infrastructure to protect us from the flooding. And flooding is, in a vicious circle, actually exacerbated and made more likely and more frequent as a result of the changes in land use that have taken place. And as we all probably know, infrastructure is only as good as it is maintained. And so we end up actually, in many cases, exposing ourselves to increased risk as infrastructure is built, but then there may not always be the funds or the systems in place to keep it operational. And so you have instances like this, Finch Avenue, which was the failure of a culvert that led to the complete washout of the entire road. We also then have legacy problems such as the Don River, which has been channelized and moved and restricted. And so when we have these increased flows, there just isn't the capacity, and so they spill over to elsewhere. So the economics of all this are pretty astounding. The Canadian insurance industry, excluding this year, which is a record book one, basically pays out approximately $1.7 billion a year in water damages claims. Now this number is even that more impressive when you recognize that we do not have overland flow in Canada. So any water that gets into your house running through that window that's at grade, you can't get insurance from that water. So there's a lot of damage that the insurance company isn't even paying out for. On top of that, we know we have an infrastructure deficit. The Canadian government estimates this at $123 billion, and about $30 billion of that is infrastructure systems related to water and wastewater. Lastly, the default system that we've been using for all of our suburban development, stormwater management ponds, these also are essentially collection systems that are designed to collect sediment and require their own maintenance, which means excavating and removing that sediment once they hit their lifespan of about 15 to 20 years. And the cost of these individual cleanouts is huge, ranging from $200 to $1.5 million. The numbers of ponds that municipal cities have is also staggering. If you look at a city like a Mississauga or a Vaughan, something that is developed post-1980, they have ponds in the hundreds that are just waiting, just filling up with dirt year after year. So the big system approach to stormwater management definitely has its drawbacks, which is one of the reasons why low impact development is gaining in popularity and acceptance. So what is LID? It's a stormwater management strategy. So it is a planning and design process, and it seeks to mitigate the impacts that are most commonly associated with urbanization, which is runoff and stormwater pollution, through using a range of systems, strategies, and approaches which mimic as best as possible the natural flow path and natural water balance. And the Toronto Region Conservation Authority outlines sort of 5 principles. Fundamental to these principles is the concept of a treatment train approach. So actually following the water through the neighborhood, through the catchment system, and allowing for treatment and management along the way. So you start with the source, and then treat as much as possible at the source, convey it, and then where you can provide, while it's traveling to the end-of-pipe system, additional treatment, additional management, and then finally end-of-pipe controls. So what we have here are two examples. These are Toronto Sherbourne Commons, where you can see we have, these are actually filter beds that are been installed while the water is being conveyed to a collection channel. And then this is the most gorgeous example of a pond I'm ever going to show. This is the Corktown Common and their stormwater management pond, which is an end-of-pipe approach or system. So the economics of green infrastructure is also gaining notice, and by some big players. If you look at most of the major cities in the US, they are all including green infrastructure as a part of their 50-year plan for managing their city. The New York City estimates that they are going to be able to save about $1.5 billion in investment by implementing green infrastructure, which reduces the number of combined sewer overflows events that they have. And Philadelphia's Triple Bottom Lines study found that the LIDs offered about almost $3,000 more in benefits than a traditional gray system. So there's an economic argument that is making sense, which is supporting these technologies. So the principles of LID, the first one, and if many of you are architects, this might seem like common sense, but to engineers, it's not so much, is to plan and use the natural system as the starting point. So use the natural features that we have, the geology, the watershed scape, as our framework for planning our communities. It's mind-boggling for engineers. The next one is to focus on prevention. So minimizing imperviousness. So why do we need 4-lane, parking garages? Maybe we could reduce that to 2. Or do we need to have a ranch-style house? Can we reduce or optimize the home so that we minimize the roof area? And then integrating LID technologies like permeable pavement, green roof, or rainwater harvesting on site so they can treat it in the first place. So this leads to my third one, which is treat as much source water or as possible close to home. So this is a really important planning paradigm shift because we're inverting the entire system. Instead of using end-of-pipe centralized controls, we're now spreading the management out so that everyone is a part of the management system. And everywhere along the way, we're executing flood control and quality treatment. The fourth principle, and again, I think architects might find this is fairly common sense, but for the engineering community, it's, again, a little bit of a light bulbs going off, is to create multifunctional landscapes. As water resource engineers, we've dealt with this for years, that we expect many things from our water resources. We expect them to support industry and manufacturing and drinking water and fishing and recreation. And so when we plan our communities, we need to recognize this. It also leads to the way we manage public space and integrating stormwater systems into common areas like public spaces and the right-of-way. And lastly, it leads to designing for aesthetics. So why make our stormwater systems ugly? Let's make them enjoyable. Let's make them places that people can go and use and have a healthy life. The last main principle comes to education and maintenance. Because at the end of the day, these are still, although they might be soft engineering systems, they're still infrastructure, and they need to be maintained to be working functionally. So we need education for property owners, for municipalities, property managers, so that they know and they value the stormwater systems that are under their control. I can't tell you the number of times that I've called someone up to say, I'd like to visit your permeable pavement, and they go, my permeable what? And even though it's been 5 years, the property's changed hands, the new owner isn't aware that they have a really special parking lot. And then this also, because we're encouraging management on site, we need to establish new legal systems to ensure that we have a way of enforcing that maintenance is taking place. So, I am a big proponent of LID, and you might be wondering, if it's been around since the 90s, why don't I see it everywhere? And so these are the main challenges, and they still persist to this day. The first thing that I find is when I talk to someone about LID who's had experience, the first thing is, oh, I remember I saw a technology or I saw a system and it didn't work. With any new technology, there kind of is a risk-taking factor that we can't avoid. When you're innovating and you're trying something new, chances are it's not always going to work out great the first time. And this legacy of past failures and mistakes and learning that has been taking place really sticks in people's minds and makes them very reserved about, learning about the changes that have taken place over 30 years. The next major obstacle is the issue of private ownerships, and municipalities are still grappling with how are we going to manage this and how are we going to be confident that the oil grit separator in the new shopping complex is getting cleaned out every year. There is also, in many cases, an emphasis on the industry just to sell the product and then walk away. And so maintenance procedures really haven't been developed or explained. And so even if someone wants to properly maintain, they may not have the resources available to tell them how to go about doing it. The other challenge is, how do we actually do the math when it comes to the cost dollars? Because we're completely changing the system and we are moving who's responsible for the management from public to private, there is a perceived, a private enterprise may not appreciate the services that they're receiving on site because they had been done for free by someone else in the past. And so we have this challenge of, first of all, accounting for benefits and then understanding the true costs and the life cycle costs of these systems. And then lastly is public education. Sadly, many engineers today, if you're getting training at a university, you might not learn how to design a permeable pavement system. That's really not a part of our curriculum yet. And so we have we still need to educate a whole new generation of designers to create these systems. We need a new generation of municipalities that know how to do approvals for these systems. And then we need the public to understand that the pond that they take their dog to go for a walk is actually not just a pond, but a part of a really important system that protects their property, protects their life, and is doing these other services underneath. And this is my picture here of my undergrad hydrology class when I take them out at the end of the year and talk about water, trying to get that new generation. And then lastly, everyone wants to know, how do these things perform? And so generating the research and the numbers is an ongoing process, which really will allow industry then to say, yes, you can use this because I can show you these systems work and this is the performance you can expect. Now, before I start talking about some examples in Ontario, one other major change that is taking place here in Ontario is an adjustment for how cities see stormwater management. And for the first time, really recognizing that it is a service that, like any other service, has a dollar value attached to it. The front runners for this was the city of Kitchener, who implemented a stormwater utility in 2011. So basically, residents of Kitchener now pay a stormwater utility tax that is based on the impervious area of their property. So it's based on how much stormwater they're generating. The second phase of this, which they're now rolling out, is a credit program where residents then can receive a credit from this if they implement, systems that are going to allow them to treat and manage stormwater on site. And if you were skeptical that maybe this is or isn't catching on, City of Mississauga has voted through almost identical legislation in the past year. So we've got some really big cities changing and basically putting dollar values for the first time ever to stormwater management. Now, this is probably what everyone's really, really waiting for, the interesting stuff. I'm going to talk about 3 of the most popular permeable systems in the province, starting with my favorite, I've done a lot of research on, permeable pavements. So, in case anyone isn't familiar, a permeable pavement is a system with, it has a regular paving surface, but it's designed to have either a very coarse surface, like this pervious concrete up here, that has voids, or an interlocking block that has open joints filled with coarse aggregate. So rainwater, when it falls, goes straight through and into the underlying aggregate layers. And then instead of being laid on top of what would be traditionally aggregate A, we use an open, a clear stone so that we have space to store the water. Depending on the design, sometimes if you have the right type of soil conditions, all of the water can infiltrate into the ground. In Ontario, that tends to be very rare. So often then we will have a perforated drain at the base, which will collect some of the surplus water. They can be lined with the geotextile or they can be unlined. It really just depends. And what I have here are 3 products that I have tested with TRCA. Pervious concrete, Eco-Optilock, and Aquapave. Another product that is available but we don't see quite as much in Ontario would be pervious asphalt. It's very popular in the US, not so much here, not really sure why. And the site I'm going to give you a little bit of information about is the Courtright Permeable Pavement Parking Lot. This is in Vaughan. And this site, basically, we studied 3 side-by-side permeable pavements and a regular asphalt parking lot for 2 years to actually see how well do these guys work. What we had is basically we constructed you can't see it, but where that little orange pylon is, right at the base, we have a below-grade monitoring vault where all our equipment was stored. We had control valves so that we could actually close them and hold the water inside the pavement and the aggregate if we wanted, or open them up. We had tipping buckets so that we could continuously measure the flow of water out of the pavements from the base. Samplers so that we could collect water samples during a rain event and actually look at the quality of the effluent and the runoff. And then wells so that we could see how high that saturated amount of water was inside the pavement. And this is what we saw. This is a typical storm. We've got a little rain event here. You can see we had a little bit of rain, and then you get a typical summer storm, a short period of high-intensity rain. What you see here in the black is the water coming off that asphalt. It's instantaneous. It's as soon as it gets wet, it's into the catch basin and it's going out. So you have really peaky amount. The permeable pavements, however, take a longer time. That water has to infiltrate. It takes time before it's going to leave. And then when it does, it comes at a very slow, steady rate, and then resulting in a very, very, gentle and long trickle. So we saw reduced total volume, reduced peak flow, and then delayed flows. When we looked at the entire study, you can see this is the columns here are just showing the gray, the dark one, that's asphalt, and then these are the permeable pavements. This is the volume reduction calculated each month. What we found overall was a 43% reduction in the total stormwater outflow. We monitored about 130 rainfall events. Only 60 produced anything coming out of those underdrains. The rest of the time, all of the rainwater was captured, infiltrated, or evaporated by the permeable pavements. When it did produce runoff, or not runoff, effluent, the peak flows were reduced by at least 50%. On average, it was closer to 90%. We had a few, extreme lower ones in the winter. And we would always see an increase in detention time. And these benefits, these patterns happen in the winter as well as in the summer. And what you can see here, this is our spring thaw of 2011. So you can see this is the runoff coming off that asphalt, and then the gray is the permeable pavement. And we actually shifted the center of that spring thaw by 3 days. We delayed it by 3 days. We also saw big benefits to quality. So it didn't matter if you're looking at suspended solids, drinking water metals that are of concern like copper or zinc, or even nutrients like nitrogen or phosphorus. Because the permeable pavements are a passive filter, they can remove the particulates that is in the stormwater and produce a cleaner effluent at the end. We also saw for complex things like nitrogen, detaining the water allows for some denitrification to take place, and we actually changed the species of nitrogen, eliminating forms such as ammonia, which is very, very harmful for aquatic organisms. Now, permeable pavements do clog. This is something that is going to happen. I'm not going to try and beat around the bush. And it is a process that is very product dependent because it's directly related to the amount of area you have on the surface. So if you have very narrow joints, you're going to have to maybe clean it a little bit more frequently. And what we saw, these are just to give you sort of ranges. This is the surface infiltration capacity. And we have, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have a label here. This is the pervious concrete, eco, and aqua. So the more surface area you have, the longer you're going to have, but they are all going to decline over time. And as you can see, these are over 4 years. But important to note, the infiltration capacity of most of these systems is an order of magnitude higher than the rainfall intensity we ever receive in this province. So we still have, even after 4 years on pervious concrete and the Eco-OptiLock, we don't have any runoff. Everything goes into these permeable pavements. Now, the next product I'm going to talk about would be green roofs. And green roofs are very popular here in Toronto because of the bylaw. Now, in case just anyone isn't familiar, a green roof system is going to be a thin layer of vegetation and soil media. And the benefits, again, it's multifunctional. It provides benefits to stormwater management, but also improves energy efficiency and reduces urban heat highland effect. And the most exciting research that's going on is actually right here. This is a picture of the Grit Lab, which I'm so privileged to be working with now. And what we're trying to do here at the Grit Lab is really provide the information that industry needs to maximize this technology for evapotranspiration and stormwater management. So how can we really customize the systems so that they're optimized for the climate we have here, which will allow us to come up with improved and more appropriate standards and construction guidelines, and then develop the design tools so that we can really, really predict accurately the performance of these systems. What we're looking at, and this is a figure from the Grit Lab, is we have testbed modules that are looking at the different components that go into the green roof design. So we're looking at things like the substrate depth, the planting media, as well as the soil media, and then the irrigation regime. So we're going to see how these different things affect the performance, the resilience, and what combination is really going to allow us to maximize stormwater management. And it's a 12-year process. This is a picture courtesy of my graduate student, Jen Hill, of the lab just a few weeks ago. And it's fascinating because the longer you look at something, the more details you start to notice. So we can start seeing things like the impact plants might have on soil, or the impact prevailing snow, not soil, the impact prevailing winds have on snow accumulation. So we're really, we're going to be able to answer so many questions from the studying that we're doing up on the top of the roof. We also have phase 2 of the laboratory. I'm very privileged with 2 other professors, Professor Sleep and Margalas. We were successful in getting a grant just this past fall, which is going to allow us to fund students for the second phase, which is going to look at integrating green roofs and solar panels into the same space. So instead of thinking these as competing green technologies, why don't we put them both together and everyone's market share doubles? Other research that's going on through the university is my student, Jen Hill, is essentially going through the most extensive survey of Toronto green roofs that's been completed to date. And it's absolutely amazing as we get to have this bird's eye view of the sheer diversity of green roofs that we have as a part of our city. We've got, these are her 2 assistants in the summer, but she's been collecting samples so that we can actually look at what is the media that is on top of the roofs that we have now, and which ones are not performing, but how can we make connections between the characteristics of the soil and then the conditions we see in the field as they grow and age and evolve. So some numbers, because I know that's also everyone's favorite, is green roofs have been proven to be effective here in Ontario. TRCA, this is now a few years old, conducted a pretty intensive monitoring program of York University's green roof, and they reported that if you look at the spring months, the green roof is going to retain about 63% of the runoff. So it was able to capture it and evaporate it on site. It also provides water quality treatment. It's a misconception that roof water is clean. As with any other stormwater, there is stuff in the roof water that comes off. And so the green roof provided an improvement by reducing suspended sediment, some nitrogen, and then metals of concern like aluminum, copper, and zinc. The last system that I'm going to be covering is bioretention systems. So bioretentions are another filtration and infiltration practice where they provide temporary storage, focusing often on the water quality events, so small storms. They are an engineered area where we have some kind of engineered soil, so it's going to be very coarse, to have space for that water and the capacity to infiltrate the water rapidly. And then again, depending on your soil conditions, infiltration occurs either right into the ground or we collect it in underdrains. We will also have overflow systems as a part of these because they'll be designed to have a very small ponded area, but not anything more than about 200 milliliters. If we have water flow events that are beyond that, they overflow. Because the emphasis here is on the small storms, which contribute actually the majority of the pollution into our rivers. And there are a number of examples of bioretention systems in Ontario. Unfortunately, there isn't as much data. There's been some really interesting studies of pilot scale, mesocosm, sort of lab bench sort of size, but there is research going on at the full scale capacity. This one is MTO's first bioretention. It's in Beamsville off the QEW towards Niagara Falls. And then the Credit Valley is currently studying 2 bioretention sites at Lakeview and Elm Drive. And then TRCA, Toronto Region Conservation, is studying a bioretention system that's located in Vaughan. And as you can see, there's a variety of ways you can do this. You can do it with a very plant-intensive one, but then there's also basically rock garden approaches where you have very minimal vegetation. So the last section is no more excuses. These are the design resources. This stuff can be built if you dream it. So the resources that we have available, there are actually quite a few, and it was a legitimate argument in the past that there weren't design resources available, but not so much today. First and foremost, we do have the MOE's Stormwater Management Manual in 2003 does reference all of these technologies as viable options. And then more specifically, the Credit Valley and Toronto Region Conservation Authority collaborated together to write our own LID Stormwater Management Planning and Design Guideline. So this came out in 2010 and is available for free online. On top of that, Credit Valley is working on new manuals for specifically looking at the retrofit situation where you're retrofitting an old parking lot or an old property. And TRCA is updating a construction guide to really give all of the details of how to actually construct these systems. The Showcasing Water Innovations, which was a provincial program which is wrapping up. Through this funding resource, Credit Valley was able to construct a number of pilot projects, including those 2 bioretention systems that I showed previously. And every study that they do, that's all made available, all the information is available online. So you can look at how it was built and what they are monitoring as the system ages and evolves. They have been looking at 2 products, looking at how do we integrate them into industrial and commercial landscapes, how do we put them into the right-of-way, how do we put them into residential neighborhoods and into public property. Public property. So looking at the different real development or land use types that we have in our cities. There is also design software. So it is a very gray line when it becomes landscape architecture and engineering. It's not always clear when it's one domain or the other. But for engineers, EPA's SWIM model has been updated now for a few years to include all of the main, most commonly used LIDs like permeable pavements, infiltration trends, green roofs, bioretention. So we can model the flows of these systems for a neighborhood. That's not a problem anymore. Many manufacturers also provide their own design software. So just as an example, ICPI has permeable pavement design software that will help you do both the structural and the water design of the pavement. And we also now have costing tools. TRCA, actually with some collaboration with the civil department here at U of T, has created a low-impact development life cycle costing tool. And I just have the front page here. Basically, it's an Excel program where you download it. It's completely free, and you can pick whatever product you want, and it has all the life cycle calculations set up. So you put in your information of your site, and it'll come up with an estimate using what we have as best values to date for the whole life cycle, including construction and maintenance. And they also have a rainwater harvesting tool, which they've had available since 2010. TRCA also puts out fact sheets. So for the 3 products that I talked about today, as well as many other LID technologies, they have really nice summary fact sheets that talk about design considerations, the main objectives of these different technologies, and how to go about implementing them. And then if Ontario isn't your thing and you want to look abroad, if we just go down to the US, there's a number of manuals which are also free for download, including one focusing on highway development, and then the Urban Stormwater BMP Performance Monitoring Manual, which outlines okay, you want to study a parking lot or you want to monitor it after you've built it, how to go about it, how to do that so that the property owner knows when it needs to have maintenance. And another little plug, unfortunately probably not going to be available till 2015, but I'm on a committee at the moment where we're developing permeable pavement standards through the ASCE. So these standards are going to outline absolutely everything about the design of a permeable pavement system, from the construction to the water and then to the maintenance and the structural loading as well. So if you want to find an example of a low-impact development technology in your neighborhood. My recommendation is to go to, this is operated again by TRCA, but the ISWM has a whole database of different LID sites in Ontario, and they have nice little fact sheets about what was constructed, when it was, what size, all that sort of information available online. And if you want to go internationally, the US, for whatever reason, likes to use BMP as their acronym instead of LID. Every region has a different name. But the International Stormwater BMP database has examples of LID systems around the world. So many US examples, a bunch from Europe, and some Australian examples as well. So there really is a wealth of information available now for designing and finding out how these systems have performed. Many of these are research sites that have a lot of data available, not just pretty pictures. So that brings me to the end, and I just want to say I think that my take-home point is, as with anything, these systems are only going to be effective if they're designed right. And to do that, you really need to be educated. And so I've hoped that from this lecture you've learned a couple of examples that are not too far away of LID systems that are being studied and being shown to work in our Ontario. And really the future is very bright. So thank you very much.
I'm going to open it up for a few questions before we take leave of the lecture hall and enjoy some snacks and refreshments. Are there any questions?
Thank you. I was just wondering if the subsurface, configuration, if there's an optimum sort of combination of whatever gravel or whatever's underneath the paver that helps actually improve the water quality or clean it?
Okay, that's a very good question, and that's actually something that I'd like to research a little bit more. There is some connection that if you have a finer aggregate, you're going to have more filtration, but in general, the aggregate are all of them, the main processes happen at that top level. And so most of the products all use basically the same 9mm chipstone, or they're a poured product and they have void spaces that might be a little bit larger. So what's underneath in terms of the large aggregate tends to be governed by the structural, the vehicle loading, and not the water quality design.
I was hoping you could ask people how many of these have actually done LID on any of their projects. There's a bunch of designers out there. I'm curious to know.
Very curious.
How many people have, okay.
It's very exciting to see that it's more widespread and growing. Any other questions?
When the models that predict the effectiveness of LIDs, do they take into account evapotranspiration?
Evapotranspiration is not a very strongly understood process from the modeling perspective. So they do, but their accuracy is going to be limited. Yes?
One of the arguments that is constantly being used against implementation of LID design is the substructure, the geoformation of the land underneath. In southern Ontario, we have many large pockets of clay. What do you say to people who are concerned about that?
Okay, well, the first thing, and I didn't say this in the presentation, but Courtright is actually on tight soils. It's silty clay, and has when we measured it, has very, very low infiltration. And what we did there was a partial infiltration system. So that volume reduction we saw, that was the reduction we were having just as a result of the infiltration that is possible in tight soils, because they can take water just very slowly, and then evaporation. So having low hydrologic conductivity or clay soils is not really an excuse. You're still going to see volume reductions, and even if you line the entire system so we have no infiltration, and that goes the same for a bioretention system, if it's completely lined, you're still going to have the benefit by reducing that peak flow, delaying the water, and the water treatment that takes place as a result of that filtration process. So those are really important facts or benefits that still occur. And one other that I also didn't talk about is the impact on temperature. You're also going to get some thermal buffering, or you're not water that comes out of a bioretention or a permeable pavement is much cooler than water that comes off the asphalt. And at Courtright, we actually saw an elimination of events that had temperatures spiking above 30 degrees. And we only had a couple events that were over 25. That's the temperature that's not going to be suitable for fish. And we also eliminated temperatures that were in that super chilled range between 0 and 1 degrees. And so when you have temperatures around that, that's when you could have frazzle ice or rapid forming of ice in the river, which can lead to ice jams or choke the fish as ice crystals form in their gills. So we lost those extremes, which is going to make the water much more useful for the organisms that have to deal with it downstream.
Do you have an idea of cost implications compared from traditional asphalt to alternative methods?
I would refer you to the TRCA's costing tool. I don't have life cycle costs off the top of my head. I know that it is more expensive, but we don't have a good way of adding dollars to the benefits that are being added. And what's going to make it probably the most viable in the future is this transition to treating stormwater as a service, where there's now going to be a credit policy put in place that's going to give property owners an immediate incentive to adopt these kind of practices. Yes.
My question is, in an urban setting where you've got, let's say, 2 company parking lots adjacent, and you put permeable on one, is it not possible it could negatively impact the adjacent parking lot, like reduce its lifespan, because you basically have a wetter, more water?
Most of these concerns about, like lateral groundwater flow or concerns about impacts to foundations can be treated through the proper design of using impermeable geotextiles, so that we basically put boundaries between areas if we want, the water to be collected. And it is a pretty common character, like in an urban area here where we don't know what's going underneath, and maybe the soils are even contaminated, so we don't want to be putting water in. It is a pretty common practice to line these systems. With bioretention, there's the common phrase is a concrete bathtub. So they're put into something, but just because we still are providing space for the water and allowing opportunities for infiltration and treatment to take place, we still get benefits.
I just wanted to point something out. In 2008, when the Toronto Green Standard was being developed, Professor Pierre Belanger, who is now over at Harvard but was here, he and I worked on the low-impact development cost-benefit analysis with the people from the city of Toronto, looking at stormwater management and water quality. And of all the measures, and this included green buildings and energy efficiency and urban heat island effect, the basic total system cost, which we arrived at, and it was approximate, but basically about every dollar that you spend on low impact development produces about $12 of benefit. So it really has an amazing leveraging impact if you put value on things like water quality in streams and how clean the water is, how healthy the fish habitats are, and so on. So if you do the accounting holistically, you discover that it's really the way to go. We just haven't quite got there yet. But I'm confident that Jennifer Drake and her people will get to the bottom of this before we know it. And we'll have her back here in a few years. So thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
It was great.